Welcome. This is Happy Healthy Cows, the show where we chat with experts about all things that keep cows comfortable and happy. We'll talk freestall bedding, manure management, barn design, ventilation, and all the details that make a big difference. After all, comfortable cows are the foundation of a healthy herd and successful dairy production. When cows are happy, the dairy farm runs better. Hi, I'm your host, Renee Schrift. I'm with McClanahan Corporation, and I'm the Director of Global Agricultural Sales for the agricultural product line. And here with me today is Dr. David Reid. He is with Rocky Ridge Dairy Consulting based out of Wisconsin, and we've asked him to join us today and provide his expertise on how retrofitting freestall barns impacts cow comfort and health. We've known Dr. Reid for my entire career, have worked with him off and on, helping to train my sales team so we can go out and we can actually walk facilities and know what good questions to ask, look for issues, look for the good things and the issues, and just have a really good balance of how to enhance cow comfort and also just and how that impacts the whole dairy as a whole. So thank you again for joining us, Dr. Reid.
Well, it's good to be here again.
Yes. So again, today our topic is how retrofitting freestalls impacts cow comfort and health. And as we look across what we do, McClanahan, we are a company that definitely impacts the bedding quality from the recyclability standpoint, recycling sand at high percentages, and then also really striving to make that bedding clean and dry that goes back under the cows that the dairymen reuse, obviously to help with the one aspect of the dairy to return on investment as far as new sand bedding purchases. Also work with dairies on the manure bedding side as well, helping with that part of the operation on making dry, clean bedding that dairies can use under their cows as well if they have the manure fiber bedding model, give them some level of success as well. But what we really want to focus on today, more on the sand side and retrofitting, and I guess part of it probably parlays into solids bedding too, because the idea is to have the cows comfortable in the stalls, maximize the stall, the lying time in the stall, and just overall like impacting, the health of the cow and the milk production ultimately. So some of these things probably play both back and forth on sand and manure because we're talking about deep beds. We're talking about keeping stalls dry and cows comfortable, right? So just want to dive in with you and kind of get your take on making some of these stalls retrofitting, some of the problem areas that you see on facilities when it comes to challenges that you are brought in to face and tackle. So would you want to dive in a little bit here on just your take on retrofitting in general, and then maybe we can talk a little bit more about some of these really specific examples that you've seen.
Okay, so I guess if I was to think about what's a common issue that I see in a lot of freestalls that really impacts what's going on is the cows that are not laying straight in the stalls. So if we have cows laying diagonally, then we're going to see manure deposited like underneath the stall dividers and not deposited over the edge, the curb into the alleyway. And so two things that's happening with that is one, it's in many cases more difficult for the cows to get up and down. And number two is just the contamination that occurs into the stall itself. So when you look at this, we've seen, if you look at the literature and we say, well, the hole seems bigger than she used to be, and we're going to have wider stalls and deeper stalls and longer stalls. And to a certain extent, that's true, but there's an awful lot of dairies that are operating, with 45-inch wide stalls, and cows are laying straight and they're fine. And you can argue that they're, what's the optimal? But, when I go to a dairy, oftentimes, we may do some things to help the cows lay in a better position, but it's pretty rare to find somebody that's going to go and take a recommendation of take out all your free stalls and put in all new ones. That's a tough one to get done. And especially in today's environment with the milk price and everything. But when we look at it, we go, okay, so what are the key things we need? Number one is we need to have head bob space for the cows to get up. So they need to be able to rise in their elbows, put their head down, raise their rear end, and then get up with a stepping kind of a motion. So if we've got anything that impedes that head bob, especially in head-to-head stalls, then we're in trouble. So we need to make sure that's open, probably at least 36 inches from the top of the bedding up so that that cow can get her head in there. And if there's a place for wider, longer stalls, it would be in the outside row of stalls if you have that in a facility. So we'd like those to be longer. And, sometimes it's a matter of moving the curb. Sometimes it's a matter of opening the sidewall or moving something out in front. So trying to get head bob space, that's number one. Number two is have the neck rail located at the right position, which makes the cow stay in the right position when they stand up. So remember, if a cow stands up, if you watch beef cows on a pasture, especially in the winter, they're eating corn stalks. They reach down, grab a bunch of corn stalks, and then they pick their head up level, and they chew it just enough moisture to swallow it. So when they're chewing their cud, they want to have their head up, not down. Typically, watch cows chew their cud. So if that neck rail is in a position to where the cow's head is down a little bit, she's not going to stand in the stall. She's going to back out and go eat or stand into her cud or do whatever she's going to do. So having that neck rail in that 48 to 49 inch range from the top of the bedding. And typically what I see most successful is, like 3 to 6 inches on the back side of the midpoint of the brisket board. So if that brisket locator's in there at 67 inches, 66 to 68, maybe a little bit longer in sometimes, but most of the time that's adequate. Then that neck rail is going to be 3 to 4 inches, maybe even 6 inches back, depending on what the stall is. So where we have those things, now we start looking about what's the design of the what I call the rails of the freestall. And if you go to World Ag Expo or a Dairy Expo here in Madison, there's a zillion different kinds of stalls. Not a zillion, but there's a lot of different stall designs. And what I've found over the years, and it came to me when Gordy Jones and I were doing a deal in Germany here, probably, I don't know how many years ago it was. And we're dealing with two large groups of veterinarians, one in northern Germany, one in southern Germany. And on the train between the two, we're still arguing. I mean, it was nasty. And I finally got so mad, I went to my room that night and I looked at all the pictures I had over the years and the pictures at Gordy's Dairy. And I went, I hate to admit it, Gordy Jones is right. It's that side rail height is the most important dimension other than head bob space and the neck rail. And so if that's in that 20 to 22 inch range from the top of the bedding, then that cow, when she lays down, is looking at a pipe. And that's going to help her lay straight. And Gordy's absolutely right in this. And he's the one that pointed out to me. And I said, okay, you're right, Gordy. And here's my new stall design. And so that, when we can get that, and that means that you're going to have a narrower space between the upper and the lower rails if you have that conventional kind of a cantilever type freestall that many of us like. So that's a big deal. So if we don't have that, then the question is, what else can we do to get cows to lay straighter? And so if we do have a brisket locator, then we can actually fasten a 2x6 at approximately the location of the brisket locator between the bottom and the top rail. And it can either be bolted on or screwed in with self-tapping screws or even wired on in 8 or 10 stalls, and then go watch the cows. Do the cows use those stalls? Do they lay straighter? And is there less manure and fecal contamination on the beds, particularly under the dividers? And invariably, the answer is going to come back, it's better. And so I was with Gordy here just January of this year. We were both on the program in Georgia, and Gordy had some new pictures now, and I actually had him send them to me, but a couple of companies are now making you can buy clamps that you can clamp to the bottom rail and the top rail and put a piece of pipe in between. Probably more expensive than a 2x6, and probably cows aren't going to break it. But in any regard, what we're looking at is to have something that interferes. When that cow lays down, she's looking right at a structure, and she is going to lay straighter. And when I went back and I looked at some of Gordy's pictures from when he first started Central Sands, and remember, he had Hojos, he had Holsteins, and the dairy progressed into being mostly a Jersey herd. They just kept breeding Jersey sires. So you had these differences in cow sizes. And I have pictures in my standard recommendation for freestalls that show here's a Jersey cow laying next to a Holstein cow, and they're both laying straight in the stall. And the secret is that side rail being at that 20 to 22 inches above the bed of the stall. So we can retrofit stalls like that, and it makes a huge difference on cleanliness of the stall. And not only that, but when you get that cow straight in, if you think about it, if she's in an angle, oftentimes some of the bony structures of the cow are going to impact the stall divider when she's getting up. Okay. Or if she's laying sideways and she starts to roll over to be comfortable, which cows will do, or they put the extended foot out like they do sometimes, or they pull it in and they tuck and roll, they're now going to hit, some of the vertebrae on their ribs on the stall dividers. And so all of those things are going to impact the cow comfort in the stall. So if we can get that cow laying straight and in the middle of the stall, then when she moves some to these other positions that are quite normal for cows, we're not going to have the bony contact with the structures of the stall. So therefore, we decrease the number of injuries we see, which means cows are happier to go into the stalls. They lay better, they lay longer, and at the end, it's better for the dairy. So that's the quick synopsis of it right there.
So we got like the front of the stall and the sides of the stall, right? What do you see even in the back of the stall? Like, talk a little bit about like that curb and like, and usually when dairies are retrofitting, we're talking about potentially going from like, let's say they had mattresses or water beds, or they want to go to a deep bedding. And I don't know where those curb heights sit with some of those types of mechanics that go into a stall, because I'm just not that, I just don't dive in and look at that closely. I'm more about the deep beds and where that curb is and how high that curb is and how clean that curb is. But at the same time, like what do you do with the curb? Like, what do you do so you can maximize that?
If I had my choice, and I've done this on some dairies where we built different kinds of curbs and then really looked at the cows. And this was years ago when we were actually going to sand beds in a lot of stalls or in a lot of barns where it didn't have sand. So we would jackhammer out even the curb. And then I had one dairy in Minnesota, in particular, that Garland Dairy, when before they built the rota, this is a long time ago, and we had different kinds of curbs, and the curb that seemed to be the most used and the one that the cows liked the best was, so the curb came up to about a 2-inch wide flat spot, and then it sloped to the inside. So you had an angle going down, so that as if the sand dropped a little bit, they're not laying against a hard curb. It's a sloped concrete, so the sand tends to stay up against it. So if a dairy's retrofitting and they're going to jackhammer everything out, then you need to be thinking about that kind of a curb. It's slightly angled down, flat at the top for a couple inches, angled down. And, we see some different recommendations on the height of that curb. But I've also seen barns where, we had gone from mattresses or mats, and we're trying to get more bedding on there. So I had stalls, and I still have a few that we remodeled using what I call the Canadian model, where you put a bedding saver. So basically a galvanized pipe with some tabs welded on and then bolted into the back of the curb with a space. So if that galvanized pipe was 1.5 inches diameter, now we could get probably 2 inches of bedding on top of that mat or mattress, and we improve cow comfort dramatically, in particular with organic bedding. But we did that on sand beds as well. And those cows would walk up into those stalls if the stall's comfortable. I'm not sure that the height of the curb is that big of a limiting factor. And I would look at it again from the point of the dairy. If I make a recommendation like this, it will be for a small number of stalls that you carefully observe the cow behavior, entering, getting up and down, and moving in and out of the stall, and say, okay, is it better the way we've recommended here, or is it better the old way? And then the dairyman goes, okay, if it is, then let's retrofit the rest. And we also always have to be thinking about the things what can you do that costs the least amount of money that will improve your cow comfort? And so sometimes it may be a bedding saver. Sometimes it may be the 2x6. It depends on the dairy, but what can we do with the least amount of money? Because it's rare. I could walk in and say, your stall dividers are terrible. You need to rip them all out of this 4,000 cow dairy and put in new ones. And it's just not going to fly. So we got to look at things that are attainable and achievable to give us the results that we're looking for. So,
Yeah. And I think that we've talked about this before in the past. It's just like even with sand separation and making a change to a system. And, we just don't, don't make a big drastic change. We just make little changes and see what happens. And so I think like even with the freestall, when we were talking about this before, it's maybe it's not like, maybe it's only just so many stalls out of the pen that you're really focusing on to see how the cows actually react to it and behave to it. And then you decide if you need to go back and tweak that design even more. What do you kind of recommend as far as a dairy that definitely is struggling, cows not lying straight, dirty stalls, things like that? What do you kind of recommend, like when we talk about just don't rip it all out, spend a lot of money, come back and do this?
So again, if there's a lot of people that have put sand in, and then they said, "Well, I still have all these issues." But when I go to the dairy, the sand is hard packed. They're not digging it, and there's maybe some issues with the stall itself. The first thing I would tell those people is we're going to dig out the back 2 feet if your black line is close. We're going to put in new or recycled sand, and we're going to keep the bedding dug. We're going to dig the bedding on a daily basis at least, or every milking basis. What does that do for your cow comfort? That's the first thing to do. And then you think about, okay, now how do we get the cows to lay straighter? What can we do to maybe make that stall even more comfortable for the cow? But in many cases, people put in sand and they go, well, I've got sand bedding, so why am I having all these issues? When in fact, the sand is really hard packed. And there's a lot of sand, especially some of the finer stuff. When you get cow urine in it, it almost turns like concrete if you're not careful. It can get really, really hard. And again, in my mind, when we have that kind of a stall and we're throwing a little new sand on there once in a while, we tend to use more sand off of those stalls because the cows are slipping and kicking and pushing that sand. When you're in a really deep bedded stall, those cows just pick their feet up and walk right back out of the stall, and you don't use as much stall or much sand out of the stall as you would if it was hard packed. People say, "You're wrong about that, Reid." And I'm like, go watch barns. And you look at the amount of sand that gets pulled out when you have hard beds with just a small amount of loose sand on top. A lot of sand gets pushed out then. So, again, it's a matter of walking in the barn, looking at what do you really see, not just looking. What do you see? What are the cows trying to tell you? And that's where we can do a lot of things in a lot of barns. And the good news is, if you take the things you've learned like that over time, like myself and Gordy and others, that we've seen a lot of barns. If we are now working with a guy that's going to build a new barn, okay, now we can get in there and hopefully get this thing lined in and set up right. So from day one, they're going to have really comfortable stalls. And again, the average dairy is not going to have that option right now, but we can do things with those stalls to help improve the cow comforts.
Yeah. Do you have any, as far as your examples go, like I mean, we see some new facilities, kind of popping up here and there, but it not as much as before. Like it's slowing down a little bit. So as far as like some of these dairies going out, or some dairy have been buying older facilities or populating another facility that they purchased. What are some of those before they even start populating that barn? In your mind, what would you go in and look for before, if you bought a facility? Let's say you're in New York, hypothetical. You bought another dairy, it was 1,000, pushing 1,500 cows. Sure, there's probably lots of things that need to be upgraded in the parlor area, but just going through that facility, what are some of the big things that you would look for? Just if you had to retrofit even a facility to your standards that was on sand, let's just say, what are some of the things that you would look for?
So if I go to that barn and I'm walking through it, and if there's a lot of the clamps that hold the neck rails that are all stretched and the bolts are stretched and bolts are missing and the neck rail's curvy and the stalls are loose and a lot of them are rusty, let's think about new dividers going in. And then we're going to put a post at every stall, and we're going to have a lot of good head bob space on the head-to-head stalls. And if it's an outside row, can we extend the barn, or can we pour a new curb, jackhammer the existing curb out and make the stall longer? And then we put a post in the right position so that our divider rail is going to be one that has that 20 to 22 inches above the stall bed. But on the top side of that, it's going to be 48 or 49 inches tall. So it's going to be a narrow space in between, and it loops back on the back to prevent contact with hips. So in those kinds of situations, you look at it and go, okay, most of the time that dairy is not going to go for the kind of money that a new one would to cost to build. But you look at it and go, if we improve the cow comfort and we got another couple pounds of milk a day, is that a big deal for the dairy? Can we pay for the stall in a short period of time? Yeah, relatively short period of time. So I would look at it and go, that kind of a dairy certainly can invest some money there. But too many of these stalls have horizontal rails in the wrong position where you interfere with the head bob space, and you're gonna make uncomfortable cows with that. And I've seen new barns that way, and it's like that you're gonna live with that for a long time. So be careful what you actually put into that barn. Some people will tell you cows don't like to lay head to head. Well, I've got all kinds of pictures in dry lot dairies of cows laying head to head. They got a whole big area and they're laying right next to one of their buddies. So can it impact? Oh, it might. But would we really think about what the research that's been done on, when you time a cow's day out, what does a cow really want? She really wants lying time. I mean, she'll cut her feeding time down and eat faster just to get her lying time. And that's pretty clear from, Rick, at Minor Institute, Rick Graham and those guys and their students they've had in there over the years. That is clear. Those cows are going to fight for downtime or laying downtime. So if we can get that stall more comfortable, like on this, as your hypothetical is here, we're going to move into say a used facility. Maybe one of the best things to do is to make sure that we get comfortable stalls. And the second best thing would be to make sure that at least the maintenance is being performed in the parlor correctly, for pulsators and gaskets and those kinds of things. Relatively inexpensive things that put together are going to help make that dairy profitable.
Yep. Let's talk a little bit. You touched on it a little earlier about the sand and the sand type. Like, McClanahan, we see all different types of sand. We see really coarse sand. We see super fine sand. We see sand that some dairies in different countries don't necessarily want to rebed with that sand that they can recover. They're recovering it for other reasons. So it doesn't end up in a digester, or they want to eliminate how much sand actually goes to a storage, or they just know they want to get it out because maybe they have a water issue and they're just trying to recycle a lot of water in their facility. So they really need the manure stream to be cleaner or void of sand in order to do that. So we see all different arrays of sand types. We've sieved so many different sands across the United States and beyond. So we know what's really good for recovery, and we know what's not going to produce high recovery rates. But we still strive to get the sand out. But when that sand goes in and it's reused, like you were touching on the fine sand, we have dairies that have decent recovery on fine sand, but you still have to be pretty careful with that sand going back in the stall, and what moisture content is acceptable because of the black line that can start forming, not only because of the moisture in the bedding, but also what the cow brings into the stall as well. And it's all mixing together. It's lying, straight, urine, milk, whatever it is. It creates a lot of problems. What's your take on sand and just the whole interplay with the stall and the cow, and then this buildup that can happen over time?
Well, to me, it's those really fine stands are going to pack really quickly in the stalls. So it just reinforces my opinion that we're going to have to be digging those stalls on a very regular basis. And so, to me, when I really got to looking at stalls and started asking guys to either build them, or I even had a guy building some for a while, and what benefit we get out of digging those stalls. And so now we're going to have soft sand every time, at least once a day, and then, which is going to be a huge improvement over what we have on a lot of barns. So when you look at the type of sand, the finer sands actually pack harder, quicker. So they're even more, you even need to dig them more than what you might in a coarser sand. And many times, if you've been recycling for a long period of time, you're going to get rid of some of that finer stuff. It's going to be a little coarser. And I don't know that there's a real, what's the best sand? The one that you can take your finger and go about 8 inches deep into the stall, real soft, that's the best one to me. We can argue about the particle size, but when I can take my hand and wiggle it right into the sand, and I can get in there 6 to 8 inches, and then when I dig a little bit below that, I find some black stuff, but the cow's feet never touch it. And the digger is digging on top of that anyway. The key, if you're going to dig stalls, like I said before, is you dig out the manure that's there, or the black line material that's been packed in there. put in newer recycled sand and then start digging. And if you just dig that stuff, you'll have a wreck. But if you pull that out, put in other sand and then start digging it, it'll work fine. And you'll be amazed the difference in lying time and milk the cows give you.
Yeah. I think you could even find that on sand that's not even recycled. Like, let's say it's just some dairies, the sand's pretty cheap, inexpensive, I should say, and maybe it's even on their own property. And so they're just using like a bank sand. They haul it in, they use it, they're having success on it. But sometimes when that success starts to go away, even on new sand, virgin sand, I'll say, there's still that potential of the the hard pan, I'll call it, that can still build up in there, and the packing. I love the analogy of, like, if you can put your hand and your fingers down in that sand and they sink right in and you get that 6 inches, that's good sand. And to me, that's also that's what it's all about, because it's about the
Yeah, and I'm
cow.
not too concerned about the particle size. It's like, can I wiggle my hand like that and drive right into the sand?
Yeah, exactly. If you hit it hard and it's like a nail file in there, is that then we have a problem.
And then, the observation from in the barn would be, when the cows walk up, do you see the dew claws get into the sand? If they do, then you've got soft sand for them to lay on. And that's, to me, when people say sand, if it's not soft sand, you're not talking about the ideal bedding for cows, even though all the literature says sand is the best. It is, but it has to be soft in order to maximize that cow comfort. And that's where a lot of people go wrong. Well, I got sand, so it's fine. Why do I have these issues? Well, your sand is hard packed. So,
Yeah, so if you're going to bed with sand, then the moral of it is, hey, make sure it's soft in the stall and it's max condition for the cows to benefit from it. If it's just like you said, don't just take it for granted. I have sand, it's forgiving, like everything's going to work out. My cell count should just drop. All these little things should change. But and sometimes it doesn't. And we've seen even the whole side of it with the stall, and even the even retrofitting. And I don't, you know, dairies that go from even manure solids to sand, maybe in their lives, they see it being a little bit for more forgiving than having to bed every single day. So maybe bedding every third or fourth day, or every 5 days. But I've also seen some herds that'll take it to 10 days just because they bed on sand. They'll say, oh, we bed every 10 days. That's a pretty long stretch of time. And usually you see, well, there's like definitely hills and valleys. And so they're not tilling and they're not keeping it level with the curb. And the cows are, I mean, that's a deep hole to crawl into. And that's also a deep hole to get out of. So I don't know that that's probably the best thing to do if you're just going to put sand in your stalls. But keeping them full and comfortable, like you've always said, is the key. And loose.
and loose, that's a big one. That, if you're using sand and it's not really soft, it's going to be a problem for you. And granted, it doesn't grow as many bacteria, but when it's hard packed like that, you're not improving your lying times. And I've had dairies where they've gone to digging, after they dug that black material out and rebedded with either new or recycled and started to dig, they'll tell you that it's 2 to 3 pounds of milk easily up in milk by doing that. And it's like, what else can you do on your dairy that can get you a couple pounds of milk that quick? It's like, lay your cows down for an extra hour. That's what you're doing. And not even an hour. I mean, if you only got 2 pounds, that's probably only a half an hour difference. But still, the cows respond by increasing milk production. I've never met the dairyman yet that's getting too much milk from his cows or getting paid too much at the creamery. So, it's like, it's a good, and, they go, well, they might eat a little more. Yeah, but, even in today's market, milk is still worth more than feed. So, it's a good deal.
So we talked a little bit about the fact that, sand and manure solids, and I will bring up manure solids here because we do have a lot of dairies that are, working with the digester piece. They've added that to their dairy for a lot of reasons. And they're working with now a manure product because they have it. And so it's that byproduct coming out of the digester. The digesters use it to make the gas or energy, whatever their model is. And then the solids are there. So, coming out of a digester that's that's operating well, that's a valuable product. It could be used for bedding. So they're looking at that, and maybe the path of least resistance for some digester developers is to to really push the manure solids, because we don't want the sand part of it as far as the project goes. And then there's that capital cost. If the dairy is not even recycling sand, or if they have another means of separating sand that's just not working the way it needs to, or perform correctly and have high recovery, then they could be persuaded, the dairyman could be persuaded to look at some other avenues to take. So not that they're compromising, but it's just a whole nother different management practice, and understanding what's going in under the cow. It's not sand at 4 or 5% moisture. It's manure solids at 50% moisture. And then understanding, how much solids are these dairy cows going to use as it compares to sand. We've seen dairies go from the published 50 pounds per cow per day, which, and I feel bad saying this, but that to me, that's dated. It's research that was done. But when we look at dairies today and where they are with the cow numbers, the overcrowding, bedding more often, using recycled sand, and it could be even drier than new sand that they're purchasing. It doesn't stay in the stall very well when it's dry. It kind of rolls right out, which you kind of wanted the cows to use the sand. You want them to be using it. You got to replenish it. So, when we switch to manure solids, and I don't know how many dairies you work with or consult with that are using digested manure solids, pressed solids, or even dried. And maybe you've seen the dry bedding going back under the cow. What's your take on that in general, as far as management practices, and where do you see some of the success on these facilities?
Again, it's management. So what most dairies will tell you, when they first put it in, they struggled, and they finally figured out how to manage it better over time. And what probably one of the main things they figured out was they're going to be bedding every day, and more frequent bedding, and the idea that your moisture level really has a big impact on, not for two things. One is for bacterial growth. Remember, three things bugs need. They need something to eat, some heat, and they need moisture. So the moisture is one that we can control somewhat. But if you get it too dry, now you get into, if you've got, depending on your ventilation system, you could be losing a lot of bedding and creating some issues that way. So there's a fine line between the right moisture level and then putting in that new supply every day. Because even if it's not 100% bacteria free, which it isn't going to be, the idea that it's got less manure in it than the manure does, okay, or less bacteria than what manure does in the dried solid. So if we're putting that back on the bed daily, it's going to probably help. So if you poll people, that's probably one of the most important aspects of when you go to that organic bedding, is to bed daily. And very few people get by with bedding on odd or interval over once a day. So
Right. It's a tough thing to manage. I think just, if you're not having success, and the stalls need to, to keep them as dry as possible, and keep the bedding that the system's producing, whether they're just post digestion or a pressed product. Generally we say, when you press that product, that's the best quality product you're going to get. If you let that set in a pile for a day, well, then it's creating a hotbed of a lot of stuff. So you don't want to be putting that back in. It's growing. So get it in the stall when it's at the best quality that you can produce, and the most consistent quality you can produce. I think that's one thing that we have found with, like you said, and we took that to heart at McClanahan Corporation many years ago when you came in and trained our team. We talked a lot about what's something you can control, and mechanically, we can separate the sand all day long. The systems separate the sand, high levels of sand, high recovery of sand, and we can separate, screw presses today can separate bedding all day long. But what's the thing that we can control the most? And Dr. Harner and John Smith told me the same thing with sand, going
moisture.
back into these facilities. We struggled with moisture in sand, and how do we, that's the one thing you can try to, McClanahan, figure out some way to help reduce moisture in bedding. And that's not only just off of the McClanahan systems, but that's even just coming out of a sand lane. And these dairies and the timing in which they use that bedding back under the cow and get it as dry as possible. And if you can come up with something to help eliminate the moisture and the drainage and the logistical time that you have to move these files around to get that sand dry enough to go back under the cow, then that's a win. And so it would be a no-brainer from the inventory standpoint and the labor standpoint, and also, and I'll just say it, the guessing game standpoint, because you kind of do have to guess in some ways, like visually. Is that sand okay to be using in pen number 50, today? Or should I wait another week? And so, we've seen that the pile management it can get pretty extreme. Same thing with solids. How do we control moisture? Well, we can control moisture by evaporating it and heating and getting it out of the product to begin with. Maybe not pressing it mechanically, but using the drying. So with the sand part of it, we've tried to take steps to really improve that moisture level that's going back in that stall, and to help eliminate a lot of the things that we talked about. Keep the sand loose, keep it drier, keep the bed depths, working for the cow. Same thing holds true with the solids, because you can pack a stall with solids pretty quickly as well, especially when it's really wet and you're not managing that properly. So we see that on both sides, sand and versus solids. Drier is better.
Yeah, and if I go back to my roots here in Southwest Wisconsin, 50 some years ago, tie stall barns, they all had a barn broom, big bristles, and they would scrape manure and then brush, scrape manure and broom. And the broom tends to dry things. So we have dairies that, have opted to go to a rubber mat with a small amount of organic bedding. And if they need to go back to think like a tie stall barn, you got to broom that surface. And if you don't broom it aggressively, then you're going to get a film that you've seen me take my fingers and, I call it the vet test, and smell it. But if you go to some of those that are rubber matted barns with organic bedding on top of them, and you scrape hard on that mat and you go and smell it, it's pretty rotten. And if you don't get that moisture under control, and people say, well, I built this barn and I was really doing really well, it seemed like the first 6 or 8 months it was really pretty good. And then all of a sudden, yeah, well, you've got a buildup now on top of that mat. And so we need to be thinking about those things. And, if history repeats itself, Sina. So we got to remember that moisture level and brooming some of these, if that's the choice that the dairy has made, then what do we got to do to keep that bed surface as dry as possible? And probably that's in some type of a mechanical broom, not just a scraper, but a broom or something that's going to scratch that surface and remove some of that bedding, and with it take some of the moisture and prevent the colonization right on top of the rubber mat. Again, it's a management dig. It doesn't matter what your bedding is. The question is, can you lay down cows and be comfortable, relatively comfortable? And then how do you manage to get that done day in and day out? And we know that successful management is doing that more days right than not right. And there's always going to be a problem on a dairy. And so get back to normal as quick as you can and have the protocols in place. That's really what it takes. So.
Yep, exactly. Well, I think we've covered so many good, just food for thought today on just some retrofitting, which I think is just good to go back and revisit that, because we do see dairies, facilities being purchased, do you need to assess that? It's a very important step in what you're buying and what you're populating, or even when you're building a new facility. What's not working on your current facility that you want to change for your new facility? Make those changes and really think about those things. Don't forget about where she's going to lie and spend the most of her time. And like you said, even just an extra hour, let her produce more milk for you. Don't try to do it in other ways. Just give her the best environment so she can do that for your facility, for you as an owner, and really just the bedding part of it, and just keeping it loose and dry, and all of those important things that we need to remember, and the quick hand test as far as the depth of the stall, and is it something she's going to be able to lie down in, and for sure that it's loose and not have this hard pan. So I think all of those things are just so important, and I'm really glad that you had a chance to join us today. Thank you for your time. Thanks for listening to Happy Healthy Cows. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite listening app, and follow Happy Healthy Cows on Instagram and TikTok for more educational cow content. Here's to happy, healthier cows.